Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
All right, we are back. And Jesse, I don't know if you heard the big news, as we're recording this in real time. The Lakers, dude, the Lakers got Luka somehow from the Mavs. I don't know how the Mavs let that happen.
Yeah. But
AD for Luka, I mean, that was a big deal. And I'm not even super into basketball. The Lakers are my team, but man, that was wild. And I was thinking, like, what goes through the mind of a GM? That's got to be one of the toughest jobs, and trying to figure out, when do you pay the contract? When do you move on? Making these millions and millions of dollars decisions. I don't know how these guys do it.
Yeah. Are we talking about the NBA? Is that what this is right now? Because I live in the Seattle area.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
No more
Our team got stolen away. How did that GM make that decision? No, it is funny. I mean, think about the pressure at that level, and with that so many dollars in play and all the factors that are part of that is GMs constantly evaluating, what should we do now? What do we do next? How do we pivot from a strategy that we had that's maybe not working, or take the next steps forward? Is it time to rebuild? Is it time to push in? I mean, there's so much sports stuff that relates to a ministry world that you and I,
for sure.
Maybe we need a spin-off podcast just for that.
That's right. Sports and ministry, something right. With a lot.
I think you and I could spin out a pretty awesome sports talk radio kind of style show, I think. Anyway.
I think so too. I agree. So today we're talking about, how do you know? I mean, listen, maybe millions and millions of dollars aren't at stake, or you certainly will have to hear from raving fans and unhappy fans
That's right.
When you make decisions. But what does it look like in the church? How do you know it's time to move off something, to move off a strategy, move off a program, move off some sort of ministry initiative? Because it's sort of underrated how important that is, because the longer you're in something that isn't working for one reason or another, the longer it delays you from doing the thing that will work.
Yeah, that's right on. And I think the challenge can be sometimes, do you need to stick with it a little longer till it clicks, or is it time to do something else and go another direction? And, part of that is just getting used to normalizing change and beginning things and ending things in the life of the church. And so sometimes this idea of making a pivot or doing something else, man, it feels almost impossible, because we're not used to doing that, to having to change direction or bring something to an end that isn't working. So really important conversation today. I'm glad you introduced this topic, because it's one that is going to, if we can understand some of the key things and kind of questions that you're going to help us ask around this, I think it's going to really help our leadership as sort of GM-ish kinds of people in leadership in our churches.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the goal. It's so funny, Jesse, since we started recording this podcast back in 2017, it's like the thing that it has helped me to do the most is just to keep everything top of mind, because it's so easy to just get lost in the weekly responsibilities that we all have. Or, you got 3 funerals in a week or something, and it's like you're just hanging on emotionally or with whatever bandwidth you have. So if you're not intentional, this stuff is the first stuff to go. Right. At least in my experience. So ministry methods are like lab experiments. What works is often trial and error, but how do you know? How do you know if it's working? Then how do you pivot? And again, back to sports, the pivot foot. You can pass, you can shoot, you can dribble, as long as you keep that pivot foot down. You need to be nimble and flexible according to the circumstances. So what does that look like in ministry, and how do you know? So here's 5 questions to consider as you're looking at your ministries. And really, it's just sort of like, what are we paying attention to? So here's question number 1. In whatever this ministry is, are we having to manufacture energy for it?
Yeah.
We talk about this often because it's something that happens often, is that, everything has a shelf life, and everything you inherited or even started as a ministry that once worked beautifully, one day will not work, because it just becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
What causes energy loss? It's usually a low return on investment, or ROI, if you will. it's when routines just become rote. It just loses its punch over time.
Yeah.
And what's that quote from Andy Stanley that we love? Organizations fossilize over time.
Yeah, that's right.
They do, because you just you get into a path, and that path works, but over time, that path is in danger of becoming a rut that you can't get out of, because it once worked, and you sort of stop paying attention as to whether or not it is working. But the one question that will get you thinking is, do we have to manufacture energy for this, or is this something that has an energy of its own?
That's right. Yeah. So how do we notice that? Like, what are some signs that you're manufacturing energy? I think of one big flashing sign is when it's hard to find people who want to volunteer to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's a big one.
A flashing, hey, every volunteers, it's hard. We talk about the volunteer challenge, on here a lot, but there's kind of this time where people are like, it gets harder and harder to get the troops lined up and excited about that thing. So that's one of the signs for me that maybe we're manufacturing energy here. I don't know. What else do you notice?
Yeah. The other thing is just, it's sort of a subjective thing, but it's when you're talking to people about it, like, oh yeah, we're getting ready to do this thing again. And everyone sort of lets out a collective sigh.
That's right.
You're kind of like, okay. People aren't excited about it. And it's okay to have ministries that aren't, quote unquote, exciting in the sense that people are just jacked up about them all the time. I mean, it's hard to get jacked up for a Bible study that's been going on for 5 years every week. It's a different level of commitment. But at the same time, it does tell you something.
Yeah.
If the energy in the room is sucked out every time you talk about doing this thing. And like you said, volunteers, but staff as well. Staff will just keep trying to push it off. To somebody else, because it's just, they don't want to do it.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's huge. So we got to look for that. Like, how are we doing? Are we having to drum up in maybe even in ourselves? Do I have to talk myself into this again to get excited about it, or at least to get to a point where I'm like, okay, let's do this thing. So I think it's really important to pay attention to that first question. Yeah.
Second question is this ministry a catalyst or an impediment to church health?
Oh, man.
Right?
Depends on who you ask. Yeah.
That's a tough question, right? Yeah, it's an impact question.
It is, yeah.
Is this a catalyst or an impediment? And I think it doesn't help to dance around it. Just get to it. Is this spurring growth? If our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus, is this helping to do that, or is it getting in the way?
Yeah. Yep.
And then maybe a second question, part 2B would be, what's the opportunity cost of not changing our approach? So what could be a catalyst that we're not even doing because we're stuck doing this thing?
Yeah, because everything's a volunteer or a financial resource application. So if you're doing this over here, there's not room for another new idea that might have new life or fresh energy or something. So I think it is a really important question, and then being thoughtful with how you talk about with the people who have been leading this thing. Right?
Well,
that's where the rubber.
This is an impediment.
Yeah, you are an impediment to our mission. So how do we carefully have that conversation around, here's our vision and mission, and this thing really helped us move the needle on that, or was impactful in that. Is it still? Is this still the right thing to be doing? Does something need to shift or change, or do we need to try something different? And again, I think that comes back to normalizing that conversation, or normalizing ongoing evaluation, so that it's not just way out of left field. All of a sudden you come in with this hammer to stop doing a ministry. But if we're kind of asking along the way, helping our people even to self-evaluate, is this thing still doing what we hoped it would do? And that kind of thing. So, but yeah, a really important question. If it's not serving the mission or the purpose for which we're here, we can't let a comment like, well, this is my small group, or this is my ministry, and it's how I serve and how I give back to the church, or whatever. Those things that's not the mission. Those are fine, good things that people are doing, but we're trying to accomplish something together. And is this thing still helping us do that? And so, just as I've had some of those conversations, there's a sensitivity that you have to have around that. And I know you do, but it's that kind of that tricky spot, because there's people involved there as well. So it becomes one of those, how do you say that the right way? I like it though. I'm going to just say, well, Jason said, I have to ask you, is this an impediment to our mission, or is it actually furthering our mission? And I'm just going to quote you from now on. I think that's perfect. So everybody else out there, quote Jason, quote Jason.
Yeah. Well, that just ensures I'm going to have to stay at the church I'm at, because I'm not going to want it anywhere else. Where I see this one show up a lot is, over time, especially you're in a church that's been around a while, you've got a lot of great volunteers that have been with you for a long time, but they all sort of have their pet projects. And this is where it gets thorny, is because it's incredibly meaningful to them and they've spent many years working on it. I think this happens in missions often. It happens in other places too. It happens in worship, at music programs, things like that. It happens sort of all over the place. And it's tough, because it's not that the things that are being done don't matter, but you do need to ask the question, is this generating its own energy that's creating health, leading us toward health?
We're creating some momentum in some area.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Or is it taking away critical resources that are needed for other things?
Yep.
And it's really thorny, but that's okay. I think it's still the right question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. When was the last, I'm trying to think in my head, maybe you can't say this out loud, but I'm trying to think of the times when we've done that. And man, maybe I'll just keep my mouth shut because I'm sure somebody's listening. But
the funny part about it is, funny that you say that. I just found out in the last 2 weeks that a couple of people from the church are listening to this podcast. And I didn't know they were.
You're in trouble now.
There has been no harm done yet, it's funny because they come out to me after worship and they're like, oh yeah, like you were talking about in your podcast, I was thinking, and they have some ideas. And so I just got to be careful what I.
Yeah. So all the people from Jason's church that are listening, what's an impediment to your ministry right now? What's furthering your ministry? So take that back into your church and let's go.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And guys, he's kidding. You don't need to.
No, I'm just, I am kidding. Actually, we have a few listeners ourselves. So we were both.
We just kind of watch it. Yeah. We need some sort of secret channel. No, I'm just kidding. No, actually it's cool to have church members listening, because then they're starting to understand the reason for the decisions that we make, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. There's a larger conversation, and that's been the feedback I've gotten. They're glad that we're having this conversation. Really.
Yeah. Okay. Third question. Are the outcomes meeting the expectations? And I think that means you have to know what the outcomes are.
Yeah.
I think most people aren't measuring outcomes. They're just sort of like, oh, this seems good, or people seem to like it, or, maybe we're checking the box on this kind of thing we offer. For example, let's say you want to offer small groups and you have this, and one of them's like an intentional New Testament Bible study. You're like, great, that's kind of that kind of small group, and you go down the line. But what are the outcomes? Are the people in that group, are they hitting the outcomes that you're hoping for? For example, anything in the life of the church, I think I like to simplify it, because I don't like having to remember a lot of metrics or things, frameworks. So I always look at the fruit test, just back at, Jesus saying a good tree is going to bear good fruit.
Yeah. What's
the fruit of whatever the ministry is that we're doing? Is it godly fruit? Is it good fruit? It doesn't have to mean that it's like copious amounts of fruit, because not everything will be like that. But is it bearing fruit? Does it seem like it is a good and godly thing? That's how you measure an outcome. Is it meeting your expectation? Now, most of the things you're going to do in the church are going to be a yes. Not all of them, but most of them. And then the second is one that I like. It's from Acts 2. And I think it was Bob Weitzel who first talked about this. And it might have been in the very first episode of the podcast. But what are the measurements, or what are the outcomes from Acts 2? Well, that the believers will grow in maturity, unity, favor, and numbers.
Right.
So just look at it through that lens. Are we growing? Are people growing maturity? It doesn't have to be all of them. Could be just one of them. It's great if it's multiple of them. But unless you're paying attention to the outcomes, you're not going to know if you're meeting the expectations. You're not going to know if it's actually delivering on what you hope it delivers.
Yeah, I think it's good. So having some way to evaluate that. Metrics are hard in the church. I mean, we can always measure, did people come or not? So that tells us something right there, right? So people are engaged and liking it, they're going to show up, and if it's not meeting that need, they'll stop. So you kind of get that people vote with their feet kind of piece, but then kind of the more qualitative metrics are hard. Is this helping people grow in their relationship with God and grow in community, grow in their love of their neighbor outside of the church, or grow in their understanding of Scripture? I mean, so those are like qualitative metrics that are hard to drill down on. I mean, you can sort of subjectively ask people, do you feel like you know more about the New Testament now than you did before you started the class? And, I don't know, you could put a percentage on it, I guess. I know 20% more than I did before, if you wanted to get really crazy. But there's something of some feel to that as well, alongside just did people come and did people benefit? So yeah, I think it's important. Evaluating outcomes, is it accomplishing what we hope? And if it's not, then I think there's some honest conversations that need to be had that are, again, the challenging part of ministry, but so important.
And it doesn't mean you have to stop whatever the thing is, but maybe you just need to adjust it.
Yeah,
so that it does meet the meet the expectations.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the only way I found anyway to do this on a consistent basis is to bake it into whatever you are already doing. So we've talked about this recently, where every week we do some evaluating on our leadership team of, if we did a thing, how'd the thing go? Like, did it meet the expectations? Was it what it was supposed to be? And it's part of our normal conversation. I think that's the only way you do this consistently, whatever that looks like for your church. How can you have a regular conversation as part of the conversations you have every week?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a little tricky, because I mean, part of that is like, oh, that feels like, man, that's gonna be a lot of work to evaluate everything. But if you just build it into the rhythm of spending a few minutes on the front end, how did it go? What are we noticing? It just becomes part of the conversation. It becomes a habit that is natural, and not this sort of forced external thing that you're going to try and put over the top of everything. So I think good ongoing evaluation. Do it. Yeah.
Number 4, is there something else we could do that would be better or more effective?
Probably.
Right? So we've run into this so many times. I can't. A lot of people are surprised when I tell them, the things that we've landed on are pretty much trial and error. They were best guesses. They weren't always our first choice. Sometimes our first choice didn't work, but we hold those plans very loosely. We're just like, we know why we want to do them. And so if it's not meeting the need, or if it's not meeting expectations, let's stop wasting time and try something that will.
Yeah. Or make an adjustment. Like you said, sometimes there's a big pivot, like we're going to do something altogether different, or there's a kind of an internal pivot to tweak and to change. And I think that is important, because that all of us should have, at some level, the humility to know that there's always room for improvement. There's always a way to make it better, or maybe to do something different that would actually be more effective too. So it's kind of a culture thing at that level, just to be able to be honest. Is this really the best thing? Is there a way to make it better, or do we need to do something else that would more effectively accomplish what we're trying to do? And that's just wise, healthy, humble leadership, I think, as we go along.
Yeah, but it's not always easy, especially when it's something that you started. It's always great when you come into a new church and you could just blame everything on the last pastor, or not blame, but just say, hey, this wasn't my baby, so it's not so hard to move on.
Yeah, or it was meeting a need then, and it doesn't seem to be doing that now. But when it's close to home, and
when it's yours, you're like,
you and I have talked about that. A lot of the things that need to be tweaked or changed or pivoted out of now are things that we helped dream up and come up with. And so I'm starting to get to that phase where I'm like, get off my lawn, let's messing with my stuff. Yeah, and, not really. We got to stay open all along the way. Be adaptable.
Yeah. So 2018 for us was a big example. We started experimenting with worship services, and we decided to do a service at the same time concurrently with our traditional service, which is in the sanctuary.
Right.
Again, it was just sort of like, how do we keep growing contemporary? We said, well, let's go back into the fellowship hall. Like, we started the service, and we didn't live stream. We did a pre-recorded sermon in there on the screen with the band live. And we tried it. It didn't take. And it wasn't well attended. And so, the pandemic hit. And then on the other side, in recent years, we decided to go out of that model and do another service in the sanctuary. And that also didn't deliver what we thought it would deliver, but it has gotten its own energy, its own life,
Yeah.
and is a viable service. So it turned out to be a really good thing. It wasn't the thing we thought it was going to be,
Right.
but it was we definitely knew what didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved on from that. So I just feel like we're always asking this question: is there a way that we could do this that would be better, that would be have a bigger impact,
Mm-hmm.
more effective, more efficient, good use of resources, all of that? So
Yeah.
I think that's an
And
important question.
alongside that is this still the right thing?
Right?
Now?
Is this
And
still the right
that's,
thing?
I've shared about our Rolling Sunday thing that we did here for a number of years at Marine View, and man, I loved it. It was great. It was a cool experiment in Sunday worship, and how you can get 3 different types of music worship sets and 2 sermons and get everybody together and kind of conference style Sunday. It was so much fun. But then after the pandemic, when we're kind of consolidated down to a core community and going back out of that, it just didn't make sense anymore. And some people still ask, are we going to go back to that? And I'm like, well, if it's the model that we believe is going to help us accomplish our mission best and help people connect with God and each other and worship, then maybe we'll consider it again. But that's not what we think is best right now. And so, you have to kind of walk through stuff, but sometimes even really awesome things have to give way to another thing. And that's, that ongoing evaluation. So I still kind of miss it a little bit.
Yeah. Lastly, this one's a tricky one because it's not intuitive that it's something that may even need changing. But here's the question, then we can unpack it.
Yeah.
Is this ministry meeting the need, or is it just well attended? What I mean is, you can have something that's popular, but maybe it's not actually doing the spiritual thing that you as a staff and leadership felt like needed to be done. These are the hardest things to pivot from, because it's like, wait a minute, people are showing up.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not delivering in the way that you think.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of examples of those things where it ends up being a competing vision in a certain sense. And I remember when I started at Marine View, we had about 40% of our volunteers deployed in pastoral care in some way, Stephen ministry, deacons, counseling, different kinds of stuff along those lines, home visitation stuff. I mean, really good things. Those are all good things. And the Stephen ministry, I think, was running out of steam. We didn't have as many people wanting to have Stephen ministers, but it felt almost like it was wrong to question that 40% of our volunteer force was being deployed over here, because there was a lot of good things happening. That meant we had trouble finding volunteers for youth, children, coffee, welcome, AV, music. I mean, everything else was impacted by this sort of resource pull in that direction. And I think that is where you have to say, what is the vision? What are we called to? And is this in line with that? Because good things can be out of step with the direction that you're going. There's a lot of different things we could do as churches, but we've chosen a direction together or discerned where the Lord's leading us. And is it in that direction? Are we going together? And if not, how do you have that honest conversation about either we got to bring this into line with our direction, or we need to bring that to a close so that we can more effectively move in this direction together? That's a really nuanced leadership conversation. That's a tough one.
It is a tough one, but I promise if we all continue to ask these questions on a semi-regular basis, it doesn't have to be all the time, but I think if you can check in and evaluate, even once a quarter, to sort of look at what are we doing? Let's ask these 5 questions. I think it helps you trend toward healthier ministry.
Yeah.
And more effective ministry, which is what we all want.
I think that's spot on. And I think of some of the leaders that, as we're developing leaders here, some of our healthiest leaders that come in from the outside kind of already are naturally asking these sorts of questions. And how do we take that and kind of train our people to have that lens for all of our ministries? So we've had this awesome ministry just called Jazz Live. We just bring in jazz musicians from all over now, but they come in and it's a free jazz concert for our community. It's secular music. I open with prayer, and that's we serve cookies at the intermission. I mean, it's really a ministry just to have fun with our community. And a couple of years ago, we just asked the question after about 10, 11 years in, it was, is this still what we should be doing? And I didn't lead that question. It was actually the people involved in leadership. Does this still have legs? Is this still helping us accomplish our mission? Or do we need to do something different? And it was, and I was really grateful to have that kind of leadership that is inside of a ministry, is asking, evaluating, and seeking to make it better and make sure it's in the direction we want to go. So I think one last kind of thought off of this one, it kind of goes back to the front end on manufacturing energy and why we need to continually evaluate and then try new things and let some things go, is that as we're developing young leaders, my sense is that no one, or very rarely, does someone want to come in and babysit someone else's idea. And I noticed that showing up a lot, where someone has this really great ministry and they're looking for the person to hand it over to, but don't change it. Keep doing what I did the way I did it. And so there's this, when we allow things to end, it allows new ideas and new leadership to emerge to lead us in some other new way. So I think it's a really valuable, important set of questions and kind of a way of looking at our ministry that you've helped us with today. So good stuff, Jason.
Well, thanks. And everyone, I hope it's helpful for you. Check in with us. Reach out if you ever have any questions. Nothing's proprietary. We probably stole it from someone else. So it's
almost
Jason,
exclusively, in fact, probably. Yeah.
Jason or Jesse at reclaimleader.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, as my son reminds me to tell you to smash that subscribe button. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you hurt your computer. I don't know what that's about, but subscribe, follow us, share us with your colleagues. Again, it's how we get the word out, and hopefully we can just continue to be a resource for pastors in this crazy but wonderful time of ministry that we're living in. So thanks so much. And as we always say, ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. Take care.